All right, thanks again, Ian and Nazir, for having me. It's a good opportunity to speak here. I'm really quite impressed with the talent and the work that's been showcased over the last day and today. What I'm hoping to do here is kind of share with you a couple of things, what at least we're finding and learning around renewable energy, and kind of three things. The first two kind of interact, but kind of where's the opportunity in the market? Where do we see the challenges, and what are the recipe ingredients when we bake this cake of success? How do we make that happen? And the last slide, and the one and two, you'll find kind of interact. Number three, we also see we're involved in many different diverse parts of the industry, from aerospace to biomedical to high-end computing, and we find some recurring lessons learned from industries that have gone through rapid growth. And I thought that might be some interesting information to share as we apply it to the renewable energy space, which is a little bit silver. So I think I'm not going to dwell too much on these slides, because all of these slides are impressive. They all go sloping to the right. They all are sloping very aggressively to the right. But I think the key message, and why I'm excited, is $6 trillion will be spent in the renewable energy space over the next 20 years. And I think each show this chart span all the way up to 2050. I'm not sure about you, my crystal ball. I can't predict what I'm going to do next weekend, but it certainly, all the slides suggest and all the research suggests it's going to be a pretty impressive uptake in energy. And what we do see already, and certainly by the wealth of work presented here in other forums, the technology transformation is increasing, it's accelerating, and a lot of the adoption is driven by kind of finding a balancing act between cost, scale, and reliability. So it's certainly accelerating. If you're going to double click on that and drill down a little bit, different parts of the globe are accelerating differently. You're going to see different research reports. But of all the ones I've seen, this is a sample of one of them. But on average, they kind of show, depends on conservative, aggressive estimates, somewhere in the range of 10 to 15% compound annual growth rate. And depends on who you read, but by 2020, there seems to be a pretty good alignment and convergence, and thinking that somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 100 gigawatts will be installed every year by the year 2020. I circled that little dip here because I think it's characteristic of what's happening. And just within the U.S., these are by, oops, I got very excited there, by different regions. So the dark blue at the bottom is China and its rapid ascent, and I think we showed some of that yesterday as well. But the gray area that I circled is the U.S., and what's interesting, and this is one of the things that we're finding a lot, as different countries introduce tariffs or incentives, there's some kind of very interesting dynamics that play out in terms of adoption. So there's not just the technology and economics, there are also some, I guess, government-induced economics, quote unquote, that drive behavior. And the little dip you'll see in the U.S., it's going gangbusters, and all of a sudden there seems to come to a bit of a slowdown in 2017. And the U.S. has got incentive tax. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%-ish to get people to incentivize people to install renewable energy. So there's kind of a huge rush to get this. In fact, people are trying to pull ahead so they can install to take advantage of the tax rates. They're scheduled to expire in 2017. So a lot of the pull ahead is happening. So if you only look at the chart, as I'm going to show you next, just within the U.S., it's the same chart. Forget the color change here, but this chart kind of looks very impressive up until 2016. What you don't see is what happens in 2017. That's when the tax rates expire, and there's going to be a bit of a dip like the prior chart shows. But that's one example of the various dynamics. That happens to be a U.S. example. You can look all around the planet and see as governments and standing bodies and those kind of things are playing out. It's going to be kind of an interesting kind of chasing the buck around the planet and chasing the dollars. But I think, again, irrespective of how you look at it, there's going to be some anomalies in that process. But again, all the charts will point up and accelerate as we move to the right-hand side of the page. If you just kind of take a case study in the U.S., it is It is increasing over the next several years. The installations will double in the U.S. But what's interesting here, although the utilities have the largest share, the growth is actually in residential. It's growing roughly 3 times. So it's really going to be impressive as that adoption picks up. And part of the driver for that is it's coming into the affordability range. So I think that's kind of gives you a sense. If you kind of go a little bit deeper into this, one of the big drivers, and I think a number of people have commented on the grid parity conversation. Here's a couple of examples. Grid parity is when the cost of solar approaches or is the same as conventional sources of energy. And then you can kind of step back and say, okay, there's going to be some false economics created by various governments and tariffs and taxes and incentives and so on. But when the natural economics takes place, when the actual generation of energy through solar matches other systems, then the natural economics will take place. All those little dynamics that I gave you an example of, they'll settle out, and the natural economics will take place, which will give the industry more flight. So an example, roughly 7 states are kind of approaching or at grid parity. Particularly Hawaii is the leader, and you can see once they approach grid parity, it just takes off. 11% of installs in Hawaii have got adoption of that. And in a few more years, the number of states in the U.S. Will double from 7 to 14. So it's going to, on average, we're less than 1%, but it's going to start to take off. So when you think about the amount of attention it has, and it only has an uptake in the U.S. of less than 1% on average, once that gets kind of into the 10, 12 plus percent, it's going to be pretty impressive. And globally, if you take that grid parity example and step back and look at the world, there's a world map of where they see grid parity, either countries where grid parity is achieved or regions within those countries where grid parity is already achieved. And so you can see kind of natural acceleration through that natural economics that will take place. So that's certainly one reason why I'm excited, and one of the challenges, knowing where this is happening, because that's where I think the opportunities are going to be. Kind of getting a little bit to kind of with some of these changes, there's going to be some interesting opportunities. And I've spoken to a number of folks, and one thing that really resonated to me is this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. What the heck does that mean? The energy space was described to me in the following ways. 1/3 of the global population has access to very stable energy supply, to your home, for example, right? So 1/3 of the world, we're privileged, we're one of those nations, and many of those of us that are speaking here, you turn on your light switch, you turn on your electric stove or refrigerator, you don't even think about this is going to turn on today or not. So we're kind of that privileged 1/3 of the population. 1/3 of the population has got unstable energy. So they kind of have to consciously think and plan. Am I going to have the light switch, that light turn on when I turn on the switch, and so on. And 1/3 of the world, the last third of the world population, has got no reliable energy whatsoever. So there's going to be some interesting kind of pockets and dynamics that play out. So there's not going to be a kind of different strokes for different folks. That's really what's going to play out. So that's just at a macro level drives. Do you have a grid? Do you have a no grid? Are you on the grid or are you off the grid? Do you create a microgrid? Do you have a standalone system? All of those scenarios are going to play out differently around the world. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. There's priorities, and I kind of put some of the priorities a little bit on the next slide, but when you're talking to utilities companies, their priorities are quite different than in the residential home and commercial. I think as we saw some very gorgeous pictures of some commercial installations in the last couple of days that shows the importance of aesthetics and projects a brand for companies and so on. So aesthetics are important. When I talk to my wife about putting a solar installation on my rooftop, she kind of goes, yeah, I know that's cheap, but there's no way in heck that's going on my roof. That looks ugly. So, so that's some of the real dynamics that are happening. Whereas you talk to utilities, they cordon off that huge, several football fields worth of space, stick a bunch of solar panels there. They don't really care how long it takes. Their number one care about it is how many cents per kilowatt can you generate and how much revenue can I get out of that. So very different dynamics play out, depends on who you're talking to within the spaces. Geography, climate. I happen to love traveling to Arctic Canada. There's because it's there and it's a fascinating part of the world. But we talk about renewable energy and energy storage. Well, in the middle of summer, you got 24/7 sunshine, but come in the northern communities that are isolated. First of all, they have no grid, and secondly, in the winter, the sun don't shine for 3 months. So even the notion of energy storage becomes irrelevant because your battery is going to run out in the first day or two, and then what do you do? So there's some really interesting dynamics, just climate, obviously. But some of these things are portable, like the notion of we may have isolated communities in northern Canada, we may have also isolated communities in Africa, and they can probably leverage some of the similar design points, but there's always going to be some nuances. Land use density, shaded areas, in very urbanized centers with tall skyscrapers. You put even building integrated panels in there, and then 5 years later somebody builds a skyscraper next to you, and you got shadow for half the day. So there's a lot of kind of considerations within some of those pieces. Trees, landscaping, all those things affect energy harvest, and the whole topology of the grid. The government, an example, in the sake of speed, I'm going to skip that, but certainly tariffs and incentives are going to play themselves out. And there's a bit of a carrot and stick playing out, right? Government incentives trying to stimulate, that's the carrot. But there are situations where at least some governments believe that China was dumping a bunch of cells into the other regions of the market, so there's a tariff imposed on some of those. So now, anytime you import a cell of certain types from China, you have to pay a 30% premium to do that. So now there's a scramble in the industry, including my company, is, okay, can I shift manufacturing sources around the planet where I can avoid the tariffs? Because nobody wants to pay a 30% premium. So that creates a whole economics in itself as to where you do things. Again, it's really different privately versus publicly owned utilities, and certainly the politics play out of there. And the third section there, grid parity, I've talked about. The only thing maybe left to talk about there is the rules and the standards are changing. What's interesting in the Hawaii example, and it's playing out, I believe, in Germany and other places, when solar is a kind of a minor player within the global energy space, within the region, it's not a big deal. But what's starting to happen is grid stability. When central utilities they can know how much natural gas plants, how much nuclear plants, how much they can generate in terms of energy, and the population is generally predictable based on industry cycles within the course of a day and some patterns, how much energy demanded. So there's a complex but manageable equation. But now you have renewable energy, like in Hawaii, where it's greater than 10%. All of a sudden, you may have wind farms that start up because of the weather. You have a quiet period, wind slows down, all the wind turbines die down, all of a sudden you have a real rapid lull in the energy. And I think it was Joan that showed you duck curve yesterday. Similarly, a big cloud comes over a major solar installation, that dips. You got to have to kind of pick up the slack in some other way. So there's going to be some really interesting things. So what's driving that is some standards are catching up. For example, in Hawaii and California, there's this thing called Rule 21 that essentially need to start adding intelligence to your installations so that the grid operators can actually tell you, hey, look, back off your energy supply onto the grid, or get off the grid. You have to start putting in some smarts in the system. So communications, it's not just going to be PV panels and the power conversion. It's now going to be controls and smart systems, almost cloud-based control of the energy grid, based on most affordable, based on safety. You don't want to have kind of the East Coast blackout that we had from a decade ago, kind of a phenomena, as a lot of this instability enters with new players in the market. So all of this creates economics, and I think the piece on the right there suggests we got to be mindful of following the money, because it could quickly take you up. Just from some systems considerations, on the right-hand side, these are the things when we talk to customers, these are the things that are on their mind. And it really depends on which customers and which marketplace they're trying to address. Cost is the initial outlay cost, but you can probably see cost implications, up and down the chain. So power efficiency, communication, sizing weight. It was interesting. I had a conversation with a customer, and one of the models in residential is the conventional thinking, and that's kind of where I was until I got myself immersed deep into this industry, is, okay, so there's going to be your early adopters, and we're all going to put installations in our residences and so on. But some very innovative commercial models and financing models, give or take, it probably takes 5 to 8 years to pay off your solar installation based on the rebates and so on. So, but it could be a $5,000 to $10,000 install cost. So a lot of families aren't ready to outlay $5,000 to $10,000, even though there's a payback after, say, 7 years, just to pick something in the middle. These things will last 20 years plus, 25 years. You pay off at 7 years. On a long-term scale, that's a very easy equation to think about. Well, nobody wants to open their wallet and slap $10,000 down on the table. So some innovative models, companies are more or less going around and saying, hey, look, I'll rent your rooftop. I'll put up the initial capital outlay. They go get a $25 million loan from the bank. That's where the bankability question comes in. And I'll install it. I'll give you a rebate. I'll give you a cut in your electricity rates, but I own your rooftop. And all of a sudden, your cost of entry for the homeowner, hey, I can get renewable energy on my roof instantly, and I don't have to open my wallet. They take care of all that. So that's a very creative and innovative thing beyond the kind of really cool stuff that's discussed in this room. There's some innovation in some of the business models. So there are some examples of that. All of that really points to some of the system considerations. Every component, whether we talk about cells, whether we talk about modules, whether we talk about the power conversion, whether we talk about energy storage, whether we talk about distribution, connection to the grid, software controls, we have to really be thinking about a systems view. And again, I pick off a couple of things there that do that. If we can't think of each of the sub-elements in a system view, we're doomed that something's going to come from the right side and blindside us and make something not as compelling as perhaps initially thought. Another example, back to the rooftop installer, digressed a little bit. So when you got these big companies that own your rooftop, they measure the cost of installation when you pay a technician to climb up on the roof and start installing these things. They don't want them to be a network engineer to try to figure out how to network to your house Wi-Fi so you can connect it to the grid. Their view of the world is, if I can get so many rooftop installations done instead of 2 a day to 3 a day, that's compelling. The only thing they told that I walked away from that particular customer meeting is snap, snap, click, click. That's all they want to do. Snap, snap, click, click. That's all they want to do. And the faster they can do that, the more it is. Because a portion of the install cost of the solar installation is starting to very quickly creep up to be a very important part of it. And that gets into cables and interconnects. The more power, the bigger the cables, the cost of copper, the wiring, it starts to become a major cost. So we really got to think about the total system thinking in this, and it always comes down to the total cost of ownership over the life. Initial cost, maintenance, operations, and what do you do with it at the end? We all talk about the plastic bottles that are, plastic water bottles that are moving in. What's going to be there in 20, 25 years, so it's going to be some interesting considerations. I talked about some of the grid stability challenges. Certainly an evolution into smart grids is on its way. And just some of the kind of taking some of those priorities that you saw on the right-hand side, they will fluctuate, depends on which application and use case you're looking at. But if you kind of step back, the left-hand side are really at the component level. These are the kind of top things, and naturally cost rises to the top. Reliability, these things are out there for 25 years. Banks underwrite some of these loans, multi-million-dollar loans, tens of millions, potentially even hundreds of millions of dollars. They want to make sure they're going to keep getting their investment return from their renewable energy billings. Scalability, as you drive costs down, you need to scale modularity and the evolving standards. There's things being designed today, the standards are still only in draft stage because people can't wait. So there's a lot of interesting risk taken on, but the standards will definitely evolve. So what do you have to comply to before you can kind of power your grid or enter to the grid? From the system installers, one of the challenges, that's the snap, snap, click, click, that's the first bullet. The local regional providers, there's so many local unique dynamics. We haven't seen one company that's going to be the just that personalization of the regions. I already talked about the residential utility differentiations. So stepping back, before I kind of wrap up this portion, is the trends and opportunity drivers. So the disruption and convergence is really going to happen throughout the value chain, right at the cell level, right all the way to the system level. The technology advancement will continue to drive the adoption, primarily because a lot of technology things I was pleased to see everyone's talking about efficiency because that directly translates to cost. So it's great. The distributed generation with centralized utilities, at least that were privileged in the Western world, that drive everything, it's now going to be distributed. It's going to be a load sharing, load balancing, the smarts to balance the grid. It's going to be a really interesting phenomenon. The grid parity, I think we've beat that horse to death over the last couple of days, but that's absolutely a huge driver. The smart energy monitoring, it's really going to be ecosystems, automation, electronics are going to drive that. Efficiency, safety, I'm not sure some of you have seen the video, but safety standards are emerging where traditional installation from a utility, just put yourself in the shoes of a firefighter, and they get a call out to a house, and it happens to have a solar installation. Normally in a typical house, the roof is on fire and they need to go save somebody on the inside. They gotta get that big axe and hack their way to the windows and rooftops to go and do whatever they need to do. Well, the first thing they do, they run to the side of the house, shut off the big switch if they're pouring water and putting people up on the roof, they want to make sure it's safe for the firefighters. In a solar installation, if the sun's shining, it's generating electricity. You're on the wrong side of that big power switch. So you got potentially 600 volts sitting there with a firefighter with hoses and axes going up there. Some of us go, look, I have no idea what's going on here around this. Just the house is just going to have to burn down. Sorry, because I'm not going in there. So standards are evolving even around safety that points there. That's going to make some interesting changes in here. The intelligent controls, enabling, monitoring, controlling, get on, get off the grid, and how much. Those are going to be there, and energy storage. Some people have changed that, but that's potentially going to be the next big thing in this space. I think panels, we're there. Energy conversion, we're probably in the middle of that. And shortly, objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. A number of these things are going to happen in storage probably faster than some of us predict. And a lot of market leaders are looking for different advantages. How do you manage that supply chain and distribution? You can't be manufacturing in every location, and you can't hold inventory, and the logistics is complex. There's a very technology-oriented crowd, and I've seen some really impressive things. And how do you bring technology into the kind of commercial space? And I think there's a difference between quantum improvements and kind of continuous improvements. And it's not one or the other, but you can do both. But so just a couple of cautionary notes about the continual improvement type things. When we do 1 or 2% efficiencies, they're all important because you just step back after a decade, we will have made remarkable progress. But we have to think about when you introduce micro improvements, you have to think about the cost of developing it, productizing it, qualification cycles. Those are all lengthy and expensive points in the life cycle, and they might take too long. So if you're trying to launch something that's going to give a 1% improvement, what's the customer's interest in switching cost and changing their whole supply chain, introducing another part number to manage? It gets tricky. So one of the things that I tend to see, and I think would suggest, is you tend to kind of like when space shuttle launches. You know there's going to be launched in a certain date. It's got a certain amount of payload. So you take these micro things and you kind of queue them up. So you can do a Big Bang, which is the sum of several kind of continual improvement type things, and kind of create the impression of a more quantum leap. At the same time, I saw some really interesting disruptive things over the last couple of days. And I would encourage that, because some of those things are going to be the things that will go, come out from left field that will totally disrupt these things. So we're going to have to manage a blend of that, and they have to have a commercial impact before they really take hold. So time to market, time to how quickly can you scale it. Sometimes the generation of serial number 1 is a very different exercise than generating serial number 1 million. It's a very different. And the time to money. Investors, they all want their money back. They all invest in different businesses. And time to money. Can you make money and go turn profit? One last point. I was at a storage conference that I thought was really interesting. I forgotten the name of the gal, but she showed a chart. She went across different industries and said, you know, when you look at really the nuggets of innovation around anything, you look at your home electronics or whatever, they say the cost of putting that actual innovation into the market is usually less than 30%. 70% of the cost is everything else: logistics, distribution, manufacturing, inventory, transportation, profits, marketing, sales. So just think about the stuff that a lot of us are focused on in this room. For it to be commercial success, there's a 70% of the equation of cost that we need to factor in our thinking before we can convert that 30% of innovation into something that's actually producible and marketable and makes people money. So that was kind of the thing on that point. Couple of slides I wanted to step back, because everything here was kind of focused on the solar space and some relationships. But what can we grow from growth in adjacent markets? We're kind of fortunate that we play in a lot of different market spaces. Enterprise computing, from storage systems, the stuff that runs banks and stock exchanges, aerospace, consumer products, healthcare, and so on. What's interesting when you kind of put that into the centrifuge of what comes out at the end, some really interesting lessons learned that are the common things that underpin all of these industries that we can learn, because they've all gone through some early adoption, mass adoption, and consolidation phases. So there's some lessons to be learned. But at the same time, you also learn, we call it lateral innovation. So for example, time to market, rapid cost reduction, that comes from our experience in the consumer space. Those are very rapid cycles. When you're looking at reliability, you kind of borrow some concepts from the aerospace markets, because you can port them to our solar business. Similar on health tech. In industrial applications, complex systems, kind of one of a kind, or not one of a kind, but certainly much lower volume kind of systems in some of those cases. So each one of these things brings some interesting innovation that you can port from one industry to another. And here's kind of the Dave Letterman top 10 of what we've learned from other parts. And I believe we need to be cognizant of that, because I believe a lot of this will play out. We've seen this movie in other sectors. We've seen how the movie ends. And I think the integration of things, for example, smart panels, where the power conversion of electronics migrating up and merging with a PV panel, that's likely going to happen, because that kind of fulfills that snap, click, simple to install, simple to maintain kind of idea. Consolidation will happen. Companies are buying each other because there's a real rapid need to consolidate. If you take the fragmentation out, it accelerates. The cost, scale, and standardization relationship. If you think about anything that's really low cost, you look at a cell phone, you look at anything, the cost is driven by scale. When you can, and the scale is facilitated by either de facto standardizations or real standardization that allows people some reductions. So you can see some of them: software-defined systems, the technology winners, not necessarily market winner. There's plenty of examples around the world. And the last one I would probably add is the high-cost, low-cost, high-cost geography, the global learning. There's been a notion that the folks in the West figure things out, and then we send it off to low-cost geographies, and then we send it to low-cost geographies, and we just kind of execute. We're starting to see some really amazing learning coming back from those low-cost geographies that have figured out how to optimize systems, coming back to the high-cost geographies. We're implementing them in those future designs. So some really kind of interesting things. So I think in conclusion, it's a complex system. I think part of what we need to know is what we're good at in that entire food chain, and market for the rest. If we try to do something we're not good at, usually that ends up in the 70%, and that's usually the difference between success and failure. Thank you.